Maya stood in the quiet of her living room, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the door. The sound of a knock echoed through the house, sharp and deliberate. She froze. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. She wasn't sure if she had heard it right, or if her mind was playing tricks on her. After all these years, was it really happening? She hadn't seen him in so long, hadn't even thought about him in recent months, except for the occasional flash of memories that would hit her when she least expected them. But this was different. The knock felt real, too real, and her pulse quickened. Could it really be him? Aaron, the man who had left her standing at the altar all those years ago, when she had thought their love was unbreakable, when she had trusted him with everything, only for him to betray her in the cruelest way possible. She wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans, trying to steady her breath. She had moved on. Or at least, that's what she told herself every day. She had rebuilt her life, found new purpose, even found love again. But the memories of that day, the day that destroyed everything she had believed about herself and the world, still haunted her. She had always wondered what would happen if she ever saw him again. Would she be angry? Would she be hurt? Would she even recognize him? The knock came again, louder this time, and with it, a flood of emotions she thought she had buried resurfaced. She shook her head, as if trying to dispel the chaos swirling in her mind. This wasn't the time for memories, not now. She had to make a decision, and fast. She could pretend it wasn't him, ignore the past, and walk away. But something deep inside her told her that this was a moment she couldn't avoid, that she owed it to herself, to the woman she had become, to confront it. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them, each step heavier than the last. She reached the door, her hand trembling as she gripped the handle. With one final breath, she swung it open. And there he stood. Aaron. He hadn't changed much. His face, still boyish, with the same light brown eyes that used to make her heart flutter, now looked older, tired, with a weight to it that she couldn't place. The years had clearly taken their toll on him too. The man who had once been her everything was now a stranger standing on her doorstep, looking uncertain, almost as if he hadn't expected her to open the door at all. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with silence, and Maya couldn't find the words. What was there to say after all this time? After all the pain? The hurt? The years of wondering if she had done something wrong, if she had missed the signs, if there was anything she could have done differently to stop it? He had walked away from her, and in that moment, when the doors of the church had swung open, when the crowd had whispered behind their hands, when her heart had shattered into pieces, she had promised herself she would never let him hurt her again. And yet, here he was, standing before her, asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. Aaron, her voice came out in a whisper, betraying her calm exterior. Why are you here? He looked at her with such a raw, vulnerable expression that for a split second, Maya's heart wavered. But she quickly pushed it down. She couldn't afford to be weak, not again. She had survived all these years without him. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes of their broken future. She didn't need him. Not anymore. I need to talk to you, Aaron finally said, his voice strained, almost like he had rehearsed it 100 times but couldn't get the words right. Maya felt a flicker of disbelief. Talk? Talk about what? All these years, he had left her to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, and now he wanted to talk. I don't think there's anything left to say, Maya replied, her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. You made your choice years ago, Aaron. You don't get to just walk back into my life like nothing happened. He flinched at her words, his eyes darting to the ground before meeting her gaze again. I know. I know. I made the biggest mistake of my life, Maya. He broke off, his throat tightening, and for a moment, she saw the desperation in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. The sight of it almost caught her off guard. Could this really be the same man who had left her without a word, without an explanation, and without a second thought? Was this the same man who had promised her forever and then abandoned her in the blink of an eye? I've been trying to make sense of what happened all these years, he continued, his voice cracking with emotion. I never meant to hurt you. I was scared. I was so scared that I ran. Maya's mind reeled. She wanted to yell at him, to tell him how much he had ruined her life, how much he had taken from her. She wanted to ask him how he could have been so cruel, how he could have left her on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of her life. But instead, all she could manage was a sharp, sarcastic laugh. Scared? You were scared? Do you know what it felt like, Aaron? To stand there, to wait for you, to think you were going to show up, only to realize you weren't coming? Do you know what that does to a person? What it did to me? His face crumpled at her words, and for the first time, Maya saw the guilt, the shame, the regret that had been eating at him for years. But it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to undo what had been done. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya stood there for a long moment, her heart heavy with the weight of the past. She wanted to slam the door in his face. She wanted to tell him to leave and never come back. But something inside her, something she couldn't explain, kept her rooted to the spot. She needed to know why. She needed answers, even if they hurt. Why now, Aaron? Why after all these years, she asked, her voice quiet, almost fragile. He hesitated before replying, his eyes searching hers for something she wasn't sure he would find. I don't know. I've spent so much time trying to outrun my own guilt, but I couldn't anymore. I had to come back. I had to see you. I had to apologize, for everything. Maya closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking deep into her. Could she forgive him? Could she open her heart again to the man who had left her in pieces? Was there even a chance for reconciliation, or was this just another attempt to make himself feel better for the pain he had caused? As the door hung between them, Maya felt the tug of old wounds and the stirring of emotions she thought she had buried. There was so much she needed to say, so much she needed to understand. But in that moment, she realized one thing: opening this door wasn't just about him. It was about her. And whatever came next, it would change everything. Maya took a step back and let Aaron into her home, the door closing softly behind them. The space was quiet, the air thick with tension, and it felt like everything from the past was pressing in on her, suffocating her. The living room, with its soft, warm lighting and the familiar scent of lavender, felt different now. It was no longer just a place of refuge for her, it had become a battlefield where the past and present collided. Aaron stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, his hands in his pockets, his gaze flickering around the space as if he didn't know where to begin. Maya could feel his discomfort, his hesitation, and yet, something in her couldn't fully ignore the part of her that wanted to hear him out. She hadn't seen him in years, yet his presence, in some strange way, felt like a missing puzzle piece that had been displaced for too long. She gestured to the couch. Sit, she said, her voice cool but steady. She needed control over this conversation. She wasn't going to let him see how much his return rattled her. Aaron sank down on the couch slowly, his gaze never leaving her as he took a deep breath. Maya could hear the faint tremble in his voice when he spoke next. I never thought I'd be standing here, Maya. I never imagined it would take this long, but I knew, deep down, that I owed you something, an explanation, at least. Maya crossed her arms, leaning against the armrest of a chair across from him. An explanation? She raised an eyebrow. You think you can just show up after all this time and explain away the pain you caused? After everything? After what you did to me? Aaron's face tightened, and for a moment, he looked as though he was bracing himself for a storm. His eyes, though tired, seemed to hold a mix of regret and guilt. I don't expect you to forgive me, not immediately. I can't ask for that. I don't deserve it. But I need you to understand why I did what I did. He paused, swallowing hard. I was terrified, Maya. I know that's not an excuse. It wasn't fear of you or us, but fear of myself. Fear that I wasn't good enough. Fear that I wasn't ready to be who I promised to be. Maya's heart clenched. She had heard the "I wasn't ready" excuse before, back in their youth when he would hesitate at milestones in their relationship. But this wasn't something that could be so easily excused. He had left her standing alone on one of the most important days of her life, without a word, without any explanation. He had left her with only the sound of her own breath to fill the silence. You don't get to say you weren't ready, Aaron, she said, her voice cold but resolute. You don't get to abandon me like that and then say you were scared. Do you know what that felt like? What it felt like to wait, to believe, to trust you with everything, and then have nothing? To be humiliated in front of everyone? My friends, my family, they all watched as you crushed me. And you think telling me you were scared will make it better? Her words hung heavy in the room, and Aaron flinched as if she had physically struck him. He seemed to shrink under her gaze, but she could see the vulnerability in his expression. The weight of the guilt he carried was clear. I was scared of becoming the man I thought you deserved, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I could live up to the person you wanted me to be. You were always so sure of us, so sure of me, and I wasn't sure if I could carry that. I wasn't sure if I was good enough for you. So I ran. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to admit that, to be so raw, so open about his own fears. It was the kind of honesty she had craved all those years ago, the kind that might have saved them both from this moment of pain. But now, it felt too late. How could she reconcile this apology with the years of suffering he had left her to endure? How could she understand the man before her when the person she had loved so deeply seemed like a stranger? I don't know what you want from me, Aaron, she said softly, but with an edge that still carried her frustration. You left. You broke me. And I'm still here, trying to pick up the pieces. I've had to rebuild my life without you. I learned to move on. And now you show up, asking for answers? For forgiveness? Aaron's gaze never wavered. I don't expect forgiveness right now. I don't expect you to forget what I did, or to just welcome me back into your life like nothing happened. But I couldn't live with the fact that I left you without an explanation. I couldn't go on with my life knowing that I never even gave you a chance to understand. Maya took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. She didn't know what to do with all the emotions swirling inside her. Part of her wanted to push him away, to slam the door and never look back. But part of her, a part she hadn't allowed to exist for so long, wanted to hear more. She wanted the closure she had denied herself all these years. I'm not the same person I was back then, Aaron, she finally said, her voice quieter now. I don't need you anymore. I've made my own way. And I've been happy, despite everything. Then why do you let me in? He asked, his voice soft. Why did you open the door? Maya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a rush of emotions she had locked away. She had opened the door because, in that moment, she realized that closing it forever would mean staying trapped in the past. She wasn't that broken girl anymore, but that didn't mean the pain had just disappeared. She still had questions, still had pieces of her heart that needed mending. She opened the door because she needed answers, and maybe, just maybe, she needed to see if there was anything left of the man she had once loved. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe because I need to understand, too. Maybe because I want to know why. Aaron's eyes softened at her words, and for the first time since he had walked into her life again, she saw a flicker of hope in his gaze. But even that hope was tinged with sadness, with the reality that the road to forgiveness, if there even was one, would be long and uncertain. The silence between them stretched, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Neither of them knew where this conversation would lead, but for the first time in years, they were both ready to face it. Maya leaned back, exhaling slowly. She had opened the door, but that didn't mean she was ready to let him back in. Not yet. And she wasn't sure if she ever would be. But she had given herself the chance to heal, to hear his side, to confront the past, whether or not that meant forgiving him. The quiet between them deepened, each second stretching longer, until it felt as if the very walls of the room were closing in on them. Maya sat still, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of everything. She had opened the door to this conversation, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Her fingers nervously traced the edge of the armrest as she struggled to steady her breath, trying to make sense of the man sitting in front of her. Aaron was still there, his eyes locked onto hers, waiting for something. Maya wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but for the first time in a long while, she found herself caught between anger, confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. She had spent years trying to bury the hurt, trying to move on from the devastation he had caused. But now that he was here, so close, the weight of that past seemed to resurface with an intensity she wasn't prepared for. "Aaron," she finally said, her voice quieter this time, softer than before. "What is it you really want from me? You've come all this way, after all this time. Why now? Why didn't you come sooner? I don't understand. After everything, why come back now?" Aaron's eyes flickered with a deep, painful regret, and he ran a hand through his hair, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect you to understand. I don't even understand it myself sometimes. I guess I always thought time would make things right. I thought I could forget and move on, but it doesn't work like that. The guilt, the shame, it's always been there. And no matter where I went, no matter how much I tried to bury it, I couldn't escape what I did to you." He took a shaky breath, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I kept thinking I was doing the right thing by leaving, by not dragging you into my mess. But I see now that I only made it worse. I hurt you in ways I never even realized." Maya felt a tight knot form in her stomach. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she had healed, that she had forgiven him, that she was beyond this moment. But hearing him speak, seeing the pain in his eyes, stirred something deep inside her. Was he truly sorry, or was this just another attempt at easing his conscience? Was this apology for her, or for himself? She shook her head, pushing those thoughts aside, unwilling to fall into the trap of second-guessing herself. She had to stay strong. "You can't just waltz in here after years of silence and expect me to believe that everything you've said is the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside her. "You left me, Aaron. You left me when I needed you the most. You didn't even give me a reason. You didn't even care enough to tell me why you were leaving. You didn't fight for us. You just walked away. And now you're here asking for my understanding? For forgiveness?" Aaron's face crumpled at her words, his eyes watering as the weight of her anger hit him. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know, Maya, that I've been living with the consequences of my actions every day since I left. I think about you all the time. About what we could have been, about how I ruined it. I know I can't change the past. I know that. But I had to come back. I had to see you, to explain myself. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, but I need you to understand that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. And it haunts me." Maya could see the genuine pain in his eyes, but she still wasn't sure if she could believe him. All those years of heartache, all those sleepless nights, those unanswered questions, could they be wiped away with a few words? Could he really feel the depth of her pain, or was he simply trying to make himself feel better for abandoning her? She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she was better off without him. But now, with him standing there, she couldn't help but feel a mix of confusion and hurt. She swallowed hard, her voice shaky as she spoke again. "You have no idea what it was like, Aaron. You don't know how many times I thought about you, about that day. I spent years asking myself what went wrong. Was it me? Did I do something? Was I not enough? And then I realized, I had to stop asking those questions. I had to stop letting your absence define me." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between them. "I had to rebuild myself, to create a life without you. And it hasn't been easy. But I've done it. And I'm stronger because of it." Aaron's face softened as he listened, the words clearly cutting him deeply. "I never meant for you to go through that," he whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you. I loved you, Maya. I still do. And I know I can never take away the pain I caused. But I need you to know that I am sorry. I am so sorry." The sincerity in his voice, the raw emotion in his eyes, it was enough to make Maya's chest tighten with a combination of anger and something else she couldn't quite identify. She had spent so many years hating him for what he did to her, for leaving her without a word. And now, he was back, asking for forgiveness, asking for something she wasn't sure she was ready to give. Could she forgive him? Could she let go of the past and allow herself to heal fully? "I don't know if I can forgive you, Aaron," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't know if I can ever get past what you did. But that doesn't mean you didn't hurt me. You did. You hurt me more than I can explain. And even though I've moved on, even though I've learned to live without you, it doesn't mean that part of me doesn't still ache." For a moment, Aaron just nodded, accepting her words, the reality of the situation sinking in. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. He knew that Maya wasn't going to forgive him overnight, or perhaps ever. But even if she never forgave him, he needed her to know that he had come back to face the consequences of his actions, to take responsibility for the pain he had caused. Maya stood up, her legs shaky, her emotions still swirling. "I think it's time for you to leave, Aaron," she said, her voice more fragile than she intended. "I can't keep doing this. I need time. I need to process all of this. And I need to figure out what it means for me, not for you." Aaron stood as well, his face full of regret, but he didn't argue. He knew he had pushed her as far as she could go for now. "I understand," he said softly. "I'll go. But please, know this, I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to be honest with you. I'm sorry. I hope, someday, you'll understand." With that, he turned toward the door, his steps slow, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the years he had spent running from his mistakes. Maya watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him, and for the first time since he had arrived, she felt a strange emptiness settle in her chest. Was she relieved? Angry? Confused? Maybe all of those things. But she knew one thing for sure, this conversation wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would force her to confront the past, to reckon with the person she had become, and to decide if she could truly forgive, or if that door was closed forever. The silence in the house after Aaron left felt suffocating, almost oppressive. Maya stood in the middle of the living room, her heart still racing, her mind reeling from everything that had just been said. The door had clicked shut behind him, but the weight of his presence lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. She stared at the empty space where he had been moments before, unable to shake the strange mix of emotions that churned inside her. Anger. Relief. Hurt. Confusion. It was all so overwhelming, and she didn't know where to go from here. She slowly walked over to the window, pulling back the curtains just enough to look outside. The world seemed unchanged, still bathed in the same late afternoon light, the same neighborhood bustling with life. But her world, her inner world, had been turned upside down in the span of just a few minutes. Aaron had come back, years of silence, years of questions, suddenly collapsing into this single, chaotic moment. He had apologized, had tried to explain, but could she accept his words? Could she let go of all the years of resentment, the years of broken promises? Maya leaned her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes, trying to steady her breath. It felt impossible to sort through everything she was feeling. She had spent years healing, building her life, convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she was better off without him. And yet, here he was, knocking on her door, telling her that he had never stopped thinking about her. How was she supposed to reconcile the man who had left her standing alone at the altar with the man who now stood before her, so full of remorse? Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to make the right decision? As much as she wanted to be angry, as much as she wanted to scream and tell him to leave her alone forever, something in her couldn't completely shut him out. Maybe it was the weight of the years they had shared, the connection they had once had, or maybe it was just the rawness of his words, the vulnerability he had shown her. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she couldn't ignore the fact that his apology felt real, too real to dismiss entirely. A knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. Maya jumped, her heart skipping a beat, but she quickly realized it wasn't Aaron. She didn't know who it could be. No one else had come to see her today. Hesitating, she walked to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She opened it slowly, half expecting it to be some mistake, some random person on the other side. But when she saw who it was, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Aaron, but it was someone who, in a strange way, might make this whole situation even more complicated. Standing in front of her was Rachel, her best friend from years ago, the one person who had never stopped trying to help Maya get over the pain of what happened. Rachel had been there when Maya had sat in the empty church, crying as the guests filtered out, unsure of what had just happened to her life. Rachel had been there, holding her through the sleepless nights, helping her find a way forward. And now, Rachel was standing on her doorstep, looking at Maya with concern in her eyes. "Maya," Rachel said softly, her voice filled with both surprise and worry. I heard. I had to come see you." Maya didn't know how to respond. She hadn't expected Rachel to show up, especially after everything. She had kept this part of her life, this encounter with Aaron, hidden from everyone. She didn't want to admit that, after all these years, she was still struggling with the emotions he had left her with. But now, standing face to face with her best friend, the words came tumbling out before she could stop them. "He came back," Maya whispered, her voice shaking. "Aaron. He came to my door, after all this time. He wanted to talk. To explain." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise, and she stepped closer, her expression a mix of shock and concern. "Are you okay? What did he say? What did you say?" Maya let out a shaky breath, leaning against the doorframe for support. "He apologized. He said he was sorry. He said he was scared, that he wasn't ready. He said he's been thinking about me, about us, all these years. But I don't know, Rachel. I don't know if I can believe him. I don't know if I can forgive him. After everything." Rachel stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Maya's shoulder. "You don't have to forgive him right now. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But, Maya, you deserve to be honest with yourself. This is your life. Your decision. And no matter what happens, you can't let anyone, especially Aaron, control how you feel about what happened. It's not just about his apology. It's about you finding peace." Maya looked at her friend, feeling a surge of gratitude mixed with confusion. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to help her see things clearly, to remind her that she still had the power to choose her path. Rachel had always been the one who pushed her to confront the truth, to heal, and now, it was Rachel who was reminding her to take control of the present, not to let the past define her. Maya had been living in the shadow of Aaron's abandonment for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to reclaim her own narrative. "You're right," Maya said quietly, her voice steadying. "I need to figure out what I want. Not what he wants. Not what anyone else wants. Just me." Rachel gave her a small, knowing smile. "Exactly. And don't let him make you feel like you have to make a decision today. There's no rush. Take your time, and whatever you choose, I'll be here for you." Maya felt a sense of relief wash over her, but also a gnawing uncertainty. How could she move forward when she was still so tangled in the past? She had built a life without Aaron, and now he was asking her to dismantle it, to reconsider everything she thought she had learned about herself. But Rachel's words were like a lifeline, pulling her back from the brink of doubt. Maya turned back to look at the door where Aaron had stood moments earlier. She had let him in, allowed him to disrupt her carefully constructed life, and now she had to decide whether to let him have any more space in it. Was there room for him in her future? Or had he already taken too much from her? She didn't know. But she knew one thing for sure: whatever she decided, it would be her choice. Her peace. And no one, not even Aaron, would take that away from her again. With Rachel by her side, Maya closed the door softly behind her, the sound of it locking away the past, but not the future. The journey to healing wasn't over. It was just beginning. Maya spent the next few days in a daze, her mind endlessly circling the conversation with Aaron. She couldn't stop replaying his words in her head, but the more she thought about them, the more confused she became. Part of her felt an aching pull toward him, a part of her heart that hadn't fully healed from the wound he left behind. But another part of her, the part that had spent years rebuilding her life without him, was resolute in its defense. She had worked so hard to move on, to carve out a new existence, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to let him back into her world. Rachel, ever the steady presence, had continued to support her, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was stuck between two worlds, one where she was the woman who had moved on, who had built a life independent of Aaron, and another where she was still that girl left waiting at the altar, still desperate for closure. That girl wanted answers, wanted a reunion, wanted to believe in the version of the story Aaron had given her, but the woman she had become, strong and independent, was afraid of what opening that door again would mean. The truth was, part of her was terrified of what might happen if she let him in. What if he only returned because he couldn't live with the guilt? What if his apology was more about his peace than hers? What if he left again, like he had before, without any warning? She had lived through that heartbreak once, and she wasn't sure she could survive it again. It wasn't until a few days later, when Maya was alone in her kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the quiet ticking of the clock the only sounds in the house, that she realized something vital. She hadn't been asking the right questions. She had been so focused on whether or not she could forgive Aaron, whether she could trust him again, that she hadn't stopped to ask herself if she wanted him back. The question wasn't about him, it was about her. Was she ready to open that door? Was she ready to risk everything for someone who had walked away without a second thought? With that realization, Maya felt a weight lift from her chest. For the first time in days, she felt clear-headed, as if a fog had lifted. She didn't have to make a decision based on his needs or his guilt. She had the right to choose for herself, to choose what was best for her, regardless of his past actions. She could let him go, or she could let him in, but either way, it had to be because she wanted it, not because she was afraid to close the door to something familiar. That evening, when Rachel came over to check on her, Maya found herself sitting across from her friend, finally ready to voice the thoughts that had been brewing in her mind. "I've been thinking a lot about Aaron," she said, her voice more steady than it had been in days. "And I realized something important. I've been so focused on whether I can forgive him, but I never stopped to ask myself whether I want him in my life again. Maybe I'm still holding on to the past, and maybe I need to let that go before I make any decisions." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful but supportive. "That's a huge step, Maya. recognizing that you're the one in control of this. That's exactly what you need. It's not about him anymore. It's about you. It's about what makes you happy and whole. Maya exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. It was a big decision, a life-changing one, and she had no idea what the future would look like if she opened her heart to Aaron again. But for the first time, she felt in control of the situation. She wasn't going to make a decision out of guilt or fear. She was going to make it from a place of strength. A few days later, when the dust had settled and the initial shock of Aaron's return had faded, Maya found herself standing at the same door she had closed on him before. The night was cool, and the city streets were quiet. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest, and reached for the door handle. This time, though, she wasn't opening it because she felt pressured or confused. She was opening it because she was ready. Aaron was waiting on the other side. "Hi," he said quietly when she opened the door, his expression unreadable. He had obviously been waiting for this moment, for her to make the first move. But he didn't speak further, leaving the words between them hanging, heavy with the tension of all that had happened. Maya stepped aside, silently inviting him in, and as he crossed the threshold, she felt a strange calm wash over her. The weight of the decision wasn't gone, but it felt lighter. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she was taking the first step toward finding them. They sat down, the silence between them no longer suffocating but instead peaceful, as though both of them were searching for something, a way forward, perhaps, or maybe just an understanding that had long eluded them. After a long pause, Maya broke the silence. "I've thought a lot about what you said," she began, her voice calm but steady. "And I've come to a decision. I'm not ready to jump back into anything. I need time to figure out what I want. But I can't pretend that you coming back hasn't made me think about everything, about us, and about what I need in my life." Aaron's face softened as he listened, and for the first time, Maya felt like he wasn't just looking for forgiveness or for a second chance, he was listening to her, truly listening, without pushing for anything in return. "I understand," he said softly. "I know I can't rush this. And I don't expect you to just forgive me and forget everything that happened. I'm just glad you're willing to let me in, even if it's just this far." Maya nodded, the weight of the years they had spent apart feeling strangely lighter in this moment. Maybe they wouldn't find their way back to what they once had, maybe they would, but what mattered now was that they were starting from a place of honesty. She didn't have all the answers, but she was willing to give herself the time and space to figure it out, to heal fully without feeling pressured by the past. "I just need time," Maya said finally, her voice soft but firm. "And I need to be true to myself. Whatever happens, I have to be okay with the decision I make." Aaron met her gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "I respect that. And I'll be here when you're ready, no matter what that means. I just want you to know, I'm not leaving again. I won't run away this time." And for the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find peace with this chapter of her life, whether it led her back to Aaron or somewhere entirely different. For now, it was enough to take it one step at a time, to embrace the uncertainty and trust that, in the end, she would be exactly where she was meant to be. Weeks passed in a blur of contemplation and quiet moments of self-reflection for Maya. The decision to allow Aaron back into her life, even in such a small and tentative way, had opened up a Pandora's box of emotions she hadn't anticipated. There were moments when the old feelings, those raw, sharp memories of their time together, would surge up, overwhelming her with longing and regret. But just as quickly, those emotions would crash against the fortress she had built around herself, reminding her of how far she had come since that fateful day he left her at the altar. She hadn't let herself dwell on the idea of reconciliation, not yet. She wasn't sure if she ever would. But what was clear was that, for the first time in years, the door between them wasn't fully closed. There was space now, an openness to the possibility of exploring what might have been, what still could be, without the weight of unanswered questions and unresolved anger. For so long, she had kept her heart guarded, convinced that moving forward without Aaron was the only way to heal. But now, with him back in her life, even if only in small, fleeting moments, she began to wonder if she had closed herself off from something that could still hold meaning. Aaron respected her need for time. He never pushed. When they did talk, it was always calm and patient, and it became clear that he wasn't looking for forgiveness in the way she had once feared. He didn't need to make everything right in a single, grand gesture. His apology, though deeply sincere, wasn't the centerpiece of their conversations anymore. Instead, they shared stories, discussed their lives since they parted ways, and learned the small, sometimes painful details about each other's journeys. Aaron had never fully explained why he had left her, but in some strange way, that silence wasn't as deafening as it once had been. Maya didn't need to understand every reason for his abandonment to know that they both had grown in ways they couldn't have anticipated. Life had shaped them into different people than the ones who had once been so desperately in love, and they both had scars to prove it. Despite the deep conversations, Maya kept her distance emotionally. She told herself it was for her own good, that she needed to remain grounded and independent, that she couldn't lose herself again in someone else's story. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, the boundaries between them began to blur. There were moments when they would laugh together, when she would find herself feeling the same comfort and ease she had once felt in his presence. But those moments were always fleeting. Every time she felt the walls she had built around her begin to crumble, she would pull back, retreat into herself, unsure of where this all might lead. It wasn't until a warm evening in early summer, a few months after Aaron's return, that the course of their relationship took a turn that neither of them had expected. Maya had invited him over to her house for dinner, something casual, something that wouldn't carry too much weight. She had made her favorite pasta dish, something she hadn't cooked for anyone in years, and the simplicity of the meal felt like the first step toward normalcy, toward something that didn't feel so heavy with history. They ate together, talking about work, about life, about things that didn't matter too much but helped them reconnect in a way that felt almost natural. As the evening wore on, they moved to the living room, sitting side by side on the couch. The air was thick with unspoken words, the tension hanging just beneath the surface. Aaron hadn't pressed her for anything, he hadn't asked about a future together, hadn't tried to convince her to forgive him or start over. But Maya could feel it, the weight of the unspoken question that lingered in his eyes. What were they doing here? Was this just a friendship rekindled, or was there something more? Maya took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she felt the moment coming. She had tried to deny it for so long, but the truth was undeniable. She still loved him. Despite everything, the hurt, the anger, the time they had spent apart, there was still a place for him in her heart. It wasn't the same love she had once felt for him, the naive, desperate kind of love that had made her wait at the altar all those years ago. This was something different, more measured, more cautious, but still real. Still powerful. Without thinking, Maya turned to him. "Aaron," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something." Aaron looked at her, his eyes full of concern. "What is it?" "I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to the way things were before," she began, her words coming out slowly, carefully. "But I also don't want to pretend like I don't still care about you. I don't want to keep running from this connection we have. I need to know if we can find a way to be together again without rushing it. Without pretending that everything can just go back to the way it was." Aaron's gaze softened, and for the first time, Maya saw something in his eyes that had been missing all those years ago: vulnerability. "Maya, I don't expect things to be the way they were. I'm not asking for that. But I'm willing to take this slow, to build something with you again, if that's what you want. If you'll let me. I'm not going anywhere." Maya felt her heart leap in her chest, the tension that had been building for months finally releasing. She had been afraid to let herself feel this way again, afraid that opening up to Aaron would mean losing herself in the process. But in that moment, surrounded by the calm of her living room, she realized that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they could find a way to rebuild what they had lost, this time, with patience, understanding, and respect for each other's growth. "I want to try," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I want to see where this goes. But I need you to understand that it won't be easy. I won't forget what happened. I can't. But I want to build something real with you. Something that's ours." Aaron smiled, his expression full of relief and hope. "I understand. And I'm willing to wait. For as long as it takes." And for the first time in years, Maya felt a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she was ready to take it one step at a time. Together.